In this episode, we're going to build a study routine that works even if you do not have long, uninterrupted hours, and even if you are learning threat intelligence concepts for the very first time. A lot of learners start strong and then stall because they try to study the way they studied in school, with long reading sessions and occasional cramming. And that approach collapses when life is busy or the material feels abstract. An audio-only routine is different because it treats learning as something you can do in small chunks, repeatedly, until the ideas become familiar and easy to recall. The goal is to create a rhythm that makes progress feel normal, not heroic, and to make sure your study time turns into durable understanding rather than short-term recognition. When you do this well, you are not just preparing for a test. You are training your brain to think in the patterns that the exam rewards. Before we continue, a quick note. This audio course is a companion to our course companion books. The first book is about the exam and provides detailed information on how to pass it best. The second book is a Kindle-only ebook that contains 1,000 flashcards that can be used on your mobile device or Kindle. Check them both out at cyber.Author.me in the Bare Metal Study Guide series. An audio-only routine starts with a simple truth about memory. You remember what you revisit, and you forget what you only touch once. Beginners often confuse understanding with remembering, because the first time you hear a concept it can make sense, but that does not mean you can recall it later under pressure. Audio learning is powerful because it makes revisiting easy, and revisiting is what turns fragile understanding into stable recall. If you listen to the same idea on multiple days, your brain starts building a reliable path back to it, like walking the same trail until it becomes clear. That is why consistency matters more than intensity in an audio-first plan, because even short daily exposure compounds. The routine we are building is designed to make repetition feel natural rather than boring, because each pass has a slightly different purpose. The first building block is choosing a fixed daily listening window that you can protect without needing motivation to show up. Motivation is unreliable, but routines can be reliable if they attach to something you already do, like commuting, walking, chores, or a regular break. The best window is one that happens almost every day and does not require you to create extra time, because the moment your plan depends on creating extra time, it starts competing with everything else. In audio-only learning, the habit is the engine, so you want the engine to start automatically. Even if the window is only 20 minutes, it is enough if you use it consistently, because repeated 20-minute sessions beat one exhausting 3-hour session followed by silence. Consistency makes your progress predictable, and predictability keeps you from feeling like you are falling behind. The second building block is deciding what you do during the first listen versus the second listen, because audio-only study becomes much stronger when you give each pass a role. The first listen is for comprehension, where you let the idea settle and you do not stress about remembering every detail. The second listen is for retrieval, where you pause mentally and try to explain the concept in your own words before the narration does it for you. Retrieval is the skill that drives exam performance, because the exam does not ask whether something sounds familiar. It asks whether you can select the best answer based on your own recall and reasoning. In audio form, retrieval can be as simple as asking yourself a question at the end of a paragraph, like what was the main point, why does it matter, and what would it change in a real decision? When you listen this way, you are not just consuming audio, you are practicing recall. The third building block is using a short daily review loop that keeps older material alive while you add new material, because the easiest way to fail a certification is to study in a straight line and forget the early topics by the time you reach the end. Audio makes spaced repetition easy, and spaced repetition is just a fancy way of saying you revisit material after time has passed, so your brain learns to retrieve it again. A simple method is to keep one listening slot for new content and one shorter slot for review content, even if the review is only 10 minutes. The review slot should rotate through older topics so nothing goes untouched for too long. This prevents the painful feeling of starting over, because you never truly lose the earlier material. Over time, you begin to feel like you are building a single connected understanding rather than stacking temporary fragments. A winning routine also includes a way to check your understanding without writing notes, because audio only does not mean you never test yourself. Beginners sometimes think they are learning because they can follow along, but the exam will reveal whether they can retrieve and apply. You can create self-checks that are completely internal, like summarizing a concept out loud to yourself in 1 minute, or imagining a simple scenario and stating what phase of the intelligence workflow you are in and what the next reasonable action would be. You can also use the end of a listening session to ask yourself 3 quick questions. What was the most important distinction? What was one misconception that got corrected? And what is one way this concept connects to another concept you already know? These questions force your brain to organize information, and organization is what makes recall fast. When you practice these checks, you reduce the chance that you are fooling yourself with familiarity. To make audio-only study effective, you also need to manage attention, because passive listening can slide into background noise if you are not careful. The trick is to choose activities that allow enough mental space for comprehension, because some tasks demand too much focus and will cause you to miss key ideas. Walking, commuting, or basic chores often work well because they provide movement without heavy thinking. If you try to study while doing something cognitively demanding, you might finish the episode but retain almost nothing, which can create false confidence. A good rule is that if you regularly miss whole sections of what you just heard, the activity is too distracting for learning. Audio-only study is still study, and it still needs a slice of your attention. When you respect that, you can get real learning done without sitting at a desk. Another important part of routine design is dealing with the beginner feeling of not knowing what matters yet. Early on, everything can sound equally important, and that can make studying feel overwhelming because you do not know what to prioritize. A strong audio routine solves this by leaning on repetition, because repeated exposure naturally highlights what is central and what is secondary. The first time you hear a concept, it might feel like a blur, but the third time you hear it, you start noticing patterns and recurring themes. Threat intelligence has core ideas that come up again and again, like aligning to requirements, evaluating source credibility, and communicating confidence, and repetition will make those ideas feel familiar. Once the core ideas are stable, the surrounding details become easier to place. Your routine is not just about time management. It is about letting the brain build structure. You also want to build in a plan for missed days, because the difference between people who finish and people who quit is often how they respond to disruption. If your routine is fragile, one missed day turns into guilt, and guilt turns into avoidance, and avoidance turns into quitting. A resilient routine expects disruption and has a simple recovery rule, like never missing 2 days in a row or always doing a short review session the day after a miss. The goal is to keep the habit alive, not to punish yourself with marathon catch-up sessions that create burnout. A short recovery session reestablishes momentum and reminds you that you are still in the process. Audio-only learning is forgiving if you keep coming back, because the content is easy to revisit and the repetition is part of the design. When you plan for disruption, disruption stops being dangerous. A winning routine also benefits from deliberate variation, because listening to the same style at the same time every day can become too automatic. Variation does not mean chaos. It means using different mental tasks with the same content. Some days you listen for comprehension, some days you listen and mentally outline the flow, and some days you listen and focus on extracting definitions and distinctions. You can also vary by doing a short session where you try to predict what will be said next, which forces active engagement. Another variation is to choose one concept from the session and explain it as if you were teaching a friend, because teaching reveals whether you truly understand. These variations keep your brain engaged while still respecting the audio-only constraint. The material stays the same, but your mental relationship to it changes. Because you are preparing for a certification, your routine should also include practice at the exact skill the exam demands, choosing the best answer under uncertainty. You can do this without any practice questions by turning concepts into simple decision prompts. For example, after learning about source reliability, you can ask yourself which piece of information you would trust first and why, or what you would do if 2 sources disagree. After learning about intelligence requirements, you can ask yourself how you would refine a vague request into something decision-relevant. After learning about analysis, you can ask yourself what evidence would increase confidence or what assumption might be hiding in your conclusion. These prompts train the judgment muscle, and the judgment muscle is what makes exam answers feel obvious. Over time, you start thinking like the exam wants you to think. You should also be aware of a subtle pitfall in audio-only study, which is the temptation to speed up playback to fit more content into less time. Speed can be useful for review once you truly understand, but for beginners, it often reduces comprehension and reduces the natural pauses where your brain processes meaning. If you listen too fast before you have a stable model, you can confuse similar concepts and miss the small words that create distinctions. A better approach is to listen at a comfortable pace for new material, then optionally increase speed later for review when the content is already familiar. The routine should serve understanding first and efficiency second. If you sacrifice understanding for speed, you will pay the price later when you cannot recall or apply the concept. Audio-only study works because it is repeatable, so you do not need to rush. Over time, the routine you build should produce a noticeable change in how you think about threat intelligence topics. Instead of feeling like you are collecting random facts, you start seeing a workflow. Clarify what the stakeholder needs, collect relevant information, evaluate its credibility, analyze it into meaning, and communicate it with confidence and context. When that workflow becomes natural, many exam questions become easier because you always know what you are trying to accomplish in the scenario. You also start noticing when an answer choice is trying to pull you away from the requirement or tempt you into unnecessary complexity. That is a sign your routine is working because your brain is building intuition, not just memory. Intuition here is not a guess. It is compressed experience built through repetition. Even as a beginner, you can build that experience through well-designed listening. To close, an audio-only study routine wins when it is consistent, active, and resilient, and when it makes retrieval and judgment feel like normal habits rather than special events. The exam rewards clear thinking, careful reading, and disciplined choices, and your routine can train all of those skills without requiring you to sit at a desk with notes. When you protect a daily listening window, give each listen a purpose, revisit older material on a rotating loop, and use simple self-check prompts to practice recall, you turn time into competence. When you plan for missed days and keep recovery easy, you protect momentum and avoid the burnout cycle that ends most study plans. If you stick to a routine like this, you will not just feel prepared. You will sound prepared when you explain concepts, and you will act prepared when you face exam questions that require calm reasoning. That is what a winning audio-only routine is really for, and it is why it can be so effective for GCTI preparation.
Thanks for listening. For more audio courses, daily newsletters, and more, please visit BareMetalCyber.com.